When my pregnant wife announced her ex-boyfriend would be our baby's godfather, I smiled and said okay. Everyone thought I'd gone soft, but what they didn't know was that I'd just discovered something that would turn her perfect little plan into the worst nightmare of her life. This is how I destroyed everything she built on lies. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that like button if you've ever felt like you were going crazy while everyone told you to just trust someone. And subscribe, because this story gets absolutely nuclear. I thought I had it all figured out. At 34, I was living what everyone calls the American dream. My name's Derek, and I'd spent the last decade building a career as a software architect. Climbing the ladder, making the right moves. 4 years ago, I married Bethany, and honestly, I thought I'd won the lottery. She was beautiful, ambitious, and we just clicked. We bought this gorgeous house in the suburbs of Chicago, the kind with a white picket fence and a backyard perfect for kids. In speaking of kids, Bethany was 6 months pregnant with our first child, a daughter. I'd already started painting the nursery this soft lavender color, picking out toys, reading every parenting book I could find. I was going to be a dad, and I'd never been more excited about anything in my entire life. But that Sunday dinner at my parents' house changed everything. We were all gathered around the table. My mom had made her famous pot roast, and everyone was talking about baby names and nursery themes. The conversation was light, happy, normal. Then Bethany set down her fork, smiled this bright smile, and said something that made the entire room go silent. She said she'd been thinking about the baby's godfather. She wanted it to be Preston. Preston, her ex-boyfriend from college. The guy she dated for 3 years before we even met. My mother literally stopped mid-chew, and I watched my father's knuckles turn white as he gripped his glass of wine. My younger brother Cameron's eyes went wide, darting between me and Bethany like he was waiting for me to explode. I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I'd just heard. Bethany kept talking, filling the awful silence with her reasoning. She said Preston had always been like family to her. That he was successful now, some big-shot investment banker, stable and responsible. That he'd always been there for her, even after they broke up. She said it so casually, like she was suggesting we paint the nursery blue instead of lavender. Like this was the most natural thing in the world. But nothing about it felt natural. Nothing about it felt right. Here's the thing nobody knew at that moment. Preston hadn't exactly disappeared from Bethany's life after we got married. They texted regularly. Not constantly, but enough that I'd noticed. They met for coffee sometimes, always described as innocent catch-ups between old friends. And over the past few months, Preston had been sending gifts for the baby. Expensive ones. A designer stroller that cost more than my first car. These tiny organic cotton onesies from some boutique in New York. A handcrafted wooden crib that arrived at our door with a card that said, "For the little one, from Uncle Preston, Uncle Preston." The words made my stomach turn even then, but every time I brought it up, every time I said it made me uncomfortable, Bethany would sigh and tell me I was being insecure. Her friends told her I was being controlling. Even my own buddies said I needed to chill out, that it was normal for exes to be friendly. But sitting at that table, watching my family's faces, seeing the concern in my mother's eyes and the barely contained anger in my father's expression, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't crazy after all. After that disaster of a dinner, my brother Cameron pulled me aside in the kitchen while everyone else was still sitting in awkward silence. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked me dead in the eye. He said, "Bro, this isn't normal. Something's off here." And then my father, who's usually the quietest guy in the room, who never gets involved in anyone's business, walked over and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Son, a man doesn't stay in a married woman's life like that unless he's waiting for something." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut because deep down, I knew they were right. I'd been ignoring red flags for months, maybe longer, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But that night, driving home with Bethany sitting silently beside me, her hand protectively over her belly, I made a decision. I was going to start paying attention. The patterns were there once I actually looked. Bethany started taking phone calls from Preston outside on our porch, even when it was cold. She'd wrap herself in a blanket and stand out there for 20, 30 minutes, talking in this soft voice I could barely hear through the window. Her phone, which had never had a password in all our years together, suddenly needed one. She said it was for security because of all the baby apps she was downloading. Then I found out Preston had bought a house. Not just any house, but one in our neighborhood. When I asked Bethany about it, she smiled and said it was convenient that he wanted to be close by to help with the baby. Convenient. That word kept echoing in my head. One afternoon, I was looking for a receipt in Bethany's purse because she'd bought something I needed to return. I found a different receipt. For a bracelet. An expensive one, from Tiffany's, dated 2 weeks earlier. I'd never seen her wear it. When I asked her about it that night, she got flustered, said it was a gift to herself. That she'd returned it because it didn't fit right. But her eyes didn't meet mine when she said it. Then came the calendar discovery that made everything click into place. Bethany had been marking these Wednesday appointments, always just a little check mark on the calendar hanging in our kitchen. Doctor appointments, I assumed. Prenatal checkups. But one Tuesday night, I needed to confirm something with her OB-GYN about insurance, so I called the office. The receptionist was friendly, helpful, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Mrs. Bethany, she doesn't have appointments on Wednesdays. Her prenatal visits are scheduled for Fridays." I stood there in our kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at that calendar with all those Wednesday check marks, and I felt something inside me break. The next Wednesday, I called in sick to work. I told my boss I had food poisoning. Then I sat in my car at the end of our driveway and waited. When Bethany pulled out in her SUV, heading toward town instead of the medical complex, I followed her, all the way to an upscale restaurant downtown, and I watched my pregnant wife kiss another man. I sat in that parking lot for an hour after watching them, just shaking. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Part of me wanted to storm into that restaurant, flip their table, make a scene. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was strategy, but I realized that if I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. So I drove to a place I never thought I'd go. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Monica Reeves' ex-law enforcement, and she came highly recommended for exactly this kind of situation. She sat across from me in her modest office, took notes while I explained everything, and when I was done, she just nodded. No judgment, no surprise, like she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. She said, "Give me 2 weeks. If there's something there, I'll find it." I wrote her a check and walked out feeling like I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. But I had to know the truth. Living at home those next 2 weeks was torture. I had to pretend everything was fine. Bethany kept planning nursery details, showing me paint swatches, talking about baby names. In Preston, he actually came over for dinner one night. Bethany invited him to discuss Godfather duties. I shook his hand at the door, smiled, made small talk about the stock market and the housing bubble. The whole time, I was imagining what it would feel like to break every bone in his smug face. But I kept my cool. I played the role of the trusting husband perfectly. Monica called me after just 1 week. She said she had preliminary findings and asked if I could come to her office. I made up some excuse to Bethany about a work emergency and drove there going 20 over the speed limit. What Monica showed me made my world tilt sideways. Hotel security footage. Time-stamped, clear as day. Bethany and Preston entering together, leaving hours later. Not once. Multiple times over the past 8 months, but that wasn't even the worst part. Monica slid a folder across her desk and said, "Derek, there's a financial trail you need to see." Preston had been transferring money to Bethany, $3,000 to $5,000 every single month. And Bethany had opened a secret bank account I knew nothing about, an account with $47,000 in it. I stared at those bank statements, at transactions I'd never authorized, at money that had been siphoned from our marriage, and I felt sick. This wasn't just an affair. This was planning. This was an exit strategy. And then the darkest thought hit me, the one I'd been pushing away since I saw them at that restaurant. I looked at Monica and asked the question that had been eating me alive. How long have they been sleeping together? She told me they'd reconnected at a college reunion 10 months ago. My daughter was due in 12 weeks. I did the math in my head, and my voice cracked when I said it out loud. Monica, I need to know if that baby is mine. Monica explained that I had options. There were non-invasive prenatal paternity tests that only required Bethany's blood and my DNA sample. The problem was getting her blood without raising suspicion. We came up with a plan. I told Bethany I'd been reading about genetic screening tests, that I wanted to make sure our daughter didn't have any hereditary conditions. I played the concerned father role perfectly, said I'd even pay out of pocket if insurance didn't cover it. Bethany actually seemed touched by how much I cared. The irony nearly killed me. I took her to a private lab that Monica had arranged. They drew her blood for the genetic screening and took extra vials for the paternity test. One submitted my own sample right after. The lab tech said 7 to 10 business days for results. Those were the longest days of my entire life. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at Bethany, at her growing belly. At the nursery I'd spent weeks preparing, I felt this crushing weight on my chest. At work, I'd zone out in meetings, staring at nothing, running through scenarios in my head. My boss asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was just nervous about becoming a dad. Bethany noticed I was distant. She'd curl up next to me on the couch and ask what was wrong, her hand resting on her stomach, and I'd tell her I was just stressed. Meanwhile, Preston kept texting her. I'd see the notifications light up her phone. She started looking at real estate listings online, telling me it was just for fun, but I noticed something. Every house she bookmarked was within 5 minutes of Preston's new place. When Monica finally called, I was at my desk pretending to review code. She said 3 words that made my heart stop. You need to sit down. I closed my office door, locked it, and she told me. The baby wasn't mine. 0% probability of paternity. Not a chance. I hung up, walked out of the building without telling anyone, got in my car, and just drove. I ended up at this lake outside the city, parked by the water, and I completely broke down. For years of marriage, a home we'd built together, a life I'd invested everything into, and the baby I'd been preparing to love, the daughter I'd already named in my head, wasn't even mine. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. You either stay there or you get angry. And I got angry. I didn't go home and explode. I didn't confront Bethany in some emotional meltdown. Instead, I planned. I scheduled a family dinner at our house for that Saturday. I invited both sets of parents, my brother Cameron, Bethany's sister, and I specifically invited Preston, telling Bethany that as the future godfather, he should be part of major family events. She was thrilled. She actually hugged me and said she was so glad I was finally embracing Preston's role in our lives. What she didn't know was that I'd already prepared copies of everything. Every hotel photo, every bank statement, every text message log Monica had recovered. And I was about to show them to everyone who mattered. Saturday came and I was eerily calm. I'd spent the entire week preparing, rehearsing what I'd say, checking and rechecking every piece of evidence. Bethany was in the kitchen that afternoon, humming while she arranged appetizers, glowing with happiness. She had no idea what was coming. Preston arrived right on time, wearing some expensive designer suit. Carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than our monthly grocery bill. I opened the door, shook his hand, and welcomed him into my home like nothing was wrong. The look of smug satisfaction on his face almost broke my resolve, but I held it together. By 7 o'clock, everyone was seated around our dining table. 11 people total, both sets of parents, my brother, Bethany's sister, and of course Preston sitting there like he belonged. I'd connected my laptop to the TV earlier, telling everyone I wanted to show some photos of the nursery and our plans for the baby. Bethany kept squeezing my hand under the table, so proud, so happy. Halfway through dinner, I stood up and tapped my wine glass. The room went quiet. I said I wanted to thank everyone for coming, that Bethany and I had some important news to share about the baby. Bethany beamed at me, probably thinking I was about to announce we'd chosen a name. Instead, I picked up the remote and clicked. The TV screen lit up with hotel security footage. Crystal clear, time-stamped. Bethany and Preston kissing in a lobby, entering an elevator together. The timestamp showed it was from 3 months ago, right around the time Bethany had told me she was visiting her sister for the weekend. The reaction was immediate. Bethany screamed my name, her face going white. Preston jumped out of his chair, tried to lunge for the TV remote, but my father physically blocked him. I clicked to the next slide. Bank statements. Highlighted transactions showing thousands of dollars flowing from Preston to Bethany's secret account. Bethany's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My mother-in-law looked at her daughter with this expression of complete horror and disbelief. Then I showed them the final document. The paternity test results. Displayed on our 65-inch TV for everyone to see. 0% probability that I was the father. The room erupted. Bethany started hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. Preston tried to speak, saying we should discuss this privately, but I cut him off. I asked him how private it was when he'd been destroying my marriage for months in hotel rooms across the city. I read their text messages out loud. Direct quotes where they discussed their plan. How they'd tell me after the baby was born. How Preston would establish himself as Godfather first, create legal standing, and eventually I'd just step aside and accept the situation. Bethany's father stood up, pointed at Preston, and told him to get out. When Preston tried to defend himself, tried to say they were in love, and didn't mean for it to happen, my brother Cameron grabbed him by the collar and physically threw him out of our house. I walked out of that house that night and never looked back. I'd already packed a bag, already booked a hotel room that Monica had recommended. Behind me, I could hear Bethany sobbing, her mother screaming at her, asking how she could do this to me. To our families, to everyone. I didn't stay to watch. I'd filed for divorce that morning, before the dinner even started. My lawyer had everything ready to go. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Bethany's own family disowned her. Her mother refused to take her calls. Her father told my lawyer he'd testify on my behalf if needed. Our entire social circle took my side once they saw the evidence. In divorce court, Bethany actually tried to claim I should pay child support. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face when my lawyer presented the paternity test. The judge literally laughed, called it one of the most absurd claims she'd ever heard, and dismissed it on the spot. I got to keep the house since I'd bought it with my own down payment before we were married. Bethany had to return every penny from that secret account because it was funded with marital assets. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. But the real karma wasn't what happened to Bethany. It was what happened to Preston. Turns out his parents were old money conservatives who valued reputation above everything. When they found out their son had been having an affair with a married pregnant woman, they cut him off completely. Preston also lost a major client at his investment firm, someone who'd specifically said they only worked with people who had strong family values. His career took a nosedive. And that house he'd bought near our neighborhood, the one that was supposed to make it convenient for him to play daddy, he had to sell it at a massive loss because he couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. The baby girl was born healthy 3 months after our divorce was final. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. Bethany was completely alone at the hospital. And Preston? He disappeared. Apparently fatherhood wasn't so appealing once it came with actual responsibility and no wife to manipulate. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state, dodging Bethany's calls about child support. She ended up working 2 jobs, living in a cramped apartment, struggling to make ends meet. Her sister told my brother that Bethany cries almost every day about everything she lost. The husband who loved her, the beautiful home, the stable life. All of it gone because she thought she could have it all. As for me, I threw myself into work and got promoted within 6 months. Started therapy to process everything. Eventually sold the house because it had too many bad memories attached to it. I took a better job in Denver and moved for a fresh start. And about a year after the divorce, I met someone at a work conference. Someone genuine and kind. I'm taking it slow this time, learning to trust again, but I'm not bitter anymore. I'm free. And sometimes, that's the best revenge of all.